Hopefully I'm back now. We never manage, do we, to go like a month where it's just all smooth. There's always some point in a month where it will go wrong. But let's hope that we're only second time lucky, as Pete just said. Right, attachment trauma. That's the title, and I've left my abusive marriage. How can I separate fact from feeling? I live for my husband and kids, but Pete's just covered the rest of the question. But I need to be healthy. We're doing well today, aren't we? Okay. So first off, just let me acknowledge that when somebody leaves an abusive marriage, the suggestion of others that makes them feel better, because understandably they've got away from a situation that's been potentially violent, coercive, neglectful, emotionally abusive, it's a myth, isn't it? Because you're not leaving that person because necessarily you despise them. You're leaving because they're bad for you in a way that you now recognise isn't going to mean that you can move forward with them. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to feel an enormous and inordinate amount of stress and emotional grief. And sometimes when we leave an abusive relationship, people are like, why would you bother about that person? Why would you care? And then that means that the grief that you're feeling, which is a real grief, just doesn't have a place to go, because you don't feel like you can share it very well. Because if you do, people are judging you for not being willing to just acknowledge that you're in a better situation. So one, when you're in an abusive relationship, people aren't abusive, not 24/7. So an abusive partner is abusive full stop, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's 1% or 100%. But if you know they're abusive 15% of the time and the rest of the time you've got an 85% decent partner, then you spend your life reasoning with unreasonable and just hoping that they'll change. And then by the time you leave, you've lost your self-confidence, your self-belief, your self-esteem. You've kind of become less visible to yourself because you've kind of given parts away. Not really, but it feels like it. You know, you've given parts of yourself away so that that person can have the life that they want at a cost to you. So of course, when you talk about attachment trauma, that's going to be real, isn't it, for you? Because you've spent your life being with this person, bending, breaking, shaping, doing what it is that will hopefully keep them happy at a cost to you. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of work and also a lot of commitment and dedication. And then you're out of them. You're not with them anymore. And those emotional voids are big. And even though that person has hurt you, love can be bad love as well as good love. That doesn't deny that you have love for that person. It also doesn't deny that they had love for you. It just means it's a bad love, which means that it isn't something that rises us up. It isn't something that keeps us safe. And you deserve all those things. But all of that energy that you've dedicated to him, all of those years, your story with your children and so on and so forth, that's been a real story. And you have a lot of grief associated with it. So now it's about just like taking a step back and saying, oh, I understand that this is a very real and completely expected reaction to a change that's massive in my world. And instead of me being judgmental of the self and saying, well, I'm a fool for still having these attachment feelings and loving him, have sympathy and empathy and compassion with the part of you that is loyal and considerate and loving and committed. They are really good elements. In the right good love situation, they are the very things that will bond you and make you safe. So those things about you are not bad. It's just that when you put them in that place with him, that makes you unsafe. So you need to hear that and be like, this is really painful and I love him so much, but it is a bad love situation. And even though it's going to take time for me to heal and time for me to trust and time for me to grow and develop, and you're going to need to do all that before you think about any other relationships, you're going to be able to do that with that space that at the moment feels overwhelming and scary, and where you would usually be directing all that love to him. That space that feels overwhelming and scary, that's your new space. That's where you're going to grow. That's where you're going to push all of this new energy that you're going to develop and feel and grow into that space, and you're going to fill it. And you're going to start filling it with things like interest groups that you can go meet other people who are similar to you. You're going to do it by trying to build up a social network again, because that will have been taken away from it. And also, you want to make sure that any family relationships that you've maybe not had time to cultivate are going to be cultivated. That's what you do with that space, so the space becomes less overwhelming and much more considerate of your needs. And when you do that, those kind of feelings that you have right now, they're going to dissipate over time. But that doesn't mean that you can't honour the way that you felt about your ex. You can honour the fact that you had love for him and you have love for him, but it's a bad love and it doesn't work for you anymore. I think it's really brave that you've left. Also, I always am going to say therapy, but places like Relate, they're places you can go to talk these kind of things out. If you've got some money as well, there are opportunities to go and have things like schema therapy or EMDR, which is a trauma therapy. You can get that on the NHS, but again, you'll need to be referred through your GP, and it will need to go to a clinical psychologist who's already EMDR trained, and that can be quite a lengthy process and also isn't always available in your area, so you'd need to check that out, but you can get it privately. So have a look at those kind of options. But the most important thing is just to know that there's a lot of love that I want to send to you for the fact that you've made a very brave step, but it's a painful step, and you shouldn't feel ashamed of that, and you shouldn't feel judged for the fact that you still have those feelings. Hi Emma, I hope it's okay to ask this question. I don't know now. I've been through a few traumatic things in my life, but have never had the courage to open up. I'm not sure I can trust anyone. How do I overcome that? When you go through trauma, if you think about your brain and your body and your emotional experience, it has chance to think about ways of protecting us from subsequent experiences, right? So we're meant to learn a model, aren't we? If you think about the way it is, so like if I go near the fire and I burn myself, the likelihood is I'm probably not going to do it again. And like if I do get too close to it next time, as I feel the heat, I'm going to like pull away, right? That's the survival mechanism, and it's really effective in certain circumstances like I've just described. But when you're not in control of the trauma and there's some like bad thing happens to you and you did not cause the event, and then you're like, okay, I've got to start to try and trust the world again, and like you're moving through the world and then boom, another trauma hits you and you didn't have control over it, you can understand that survival mechanism goes into like an overreaction position and consequence, because how do I protect you? Okay, well, I'm going to protect you by we're going to shut down, we're not going to have relationships, we're not going to go scary places, we're not going to challenge ourselves, because you don't have to be doing anything for really bad things to happen. You can see how that mental process works. So the only way to move through that is to do the very thing that your whole self is screaming not to do, which is to open up. And the reason for that is twofold. One, because you're going to move through the fear, and that gives you courage, it will. But the other thing is, if we're going to use the experience of what you've had, which is traumatic experiences, right, that happened to you in spite of the fact of you not actually being the person responsible, then to not live your life fully and freely goes against the reality of what happened, which is you didn't need to be doing anything for those bad things to happen, right? You didn't. You were just unfortunate. Arguably, to then not live your life fully when you've already coped and managed those situations, albeit it's had some impact on your emotional self, you've already dealt with the devil, so to speak. You've been there, you've survived it. So it's like you have that manifestation of coping. So stretching yourself now to be like, well, actually, I've managed this on my own. Okay, I've closed down some of my social circle. I've not had relationships that I should have had. But I'm at that point now where I'm like, well, I need to change this. I need to transition this. You have the power to do that now because you've survived those other things. So like, don't waste those horrible experiences that you've moved through, albeit that you've become overprotective of the self. Now it's like, right, okay, how do I come to a resolution with these difficult feelings? And that comes down to, in my opinion, sitting with a practitioner who completely gets that kind of world. So again, somebody who's highly trauma informed, somebody who can really evidence in their practice that they've worked with people who've been in situations where they've dealt with this very restrictive way of living because they're terrified of bad things happening to them because they never caused them in the first place but had to suffer and endure them. That's what I'd say you would be best doing. But it's all about the person that you connect with as well. If you can pay for private therapy, I say that purely because you can kind of like have a conversation with the person on the phone, figure out whether you've got rapport with them. There's that thing about knowing that there are some people in this world that you can just sit down and go, wow, that's it. And arguably there are also people that you can sit down and be like, I wouldn't tell you anything in 100 years. You know, they can be equally as qualified, but you just don't connect. So look for that kind of person. And I promise you, the hardest bit is the words, the speaking the words, you know? Like there are clients that don't speak for weeks, and there are clients who come in thinking they'll never speak and they just let everything go. So move through it by just acknowledging that it's time. That's why you're asking the question. That's the question. The question is, how do I start moving through this trauma? How do I start sharing this with somebody? It's like, well, that was the first stage. You shared it with us. And that's a really powerful progression. It might not feel it in this moment because you're like, oh, I've done that now. And it's like, yes, but that's exactly the same as the speaking part. You just do it. And you accept there'll be some pain, but you also accept there'll be progress. If I want to report someone for sexual abuse 30 years ago, do I go to the police? I watch all your things and feel now is the time to do something about it, but I'm scared. I was 8. What if they don't take me seriously? Okay, completely understand that. They will take you seriously. I don't know whether I can remember who does this. I think it's, can you look this up, P? I think it's like NAPAC. Might be NAPAC, but basically it's an organisation by the police that guides you through historic abuse. I might not have got the actual word right. Just look historic abuse and then put SPED in or whatever. But it helps you go through that process, and the police will take you very, very seriously. But it's scary because you've got to sit with somebody who you don't necessarily know, and even though they're specialist trained, the point is that you're in a situation where you've got to relive the trauma, and it's scary, and that's completely okay. They know this world. Was it NAPAC? Yeah. I feel like I need a bell that's like ding, ding, ding. Her brain still works. It's amazing. I have such a terrible memory these days. So that's on there. That will guide you through it, okay? So honestly, they'll be great with you. The big thing with this is not to think about the end game. I say that to anybody who's ever going to report historic sexual abuse. Actually, I say it to anybody who I've ever worked with who's reporting abuse full stop, whether it's present or otherwise. Because if you think about the end game, which is like, I want this person in prison, right? That's what we all want. Then it becomes quite overwhelming. But if it's more like, I'm going to acknowledge and tell my story, and I want to do that in the presence of people who have got power to maybe do something about that, and it's honouring my truth, that's a better place to go with it. And then from there, just like take it through the stages. But read that, it'll be really, really helpful, and the organisation will be really, really good for you. So that's what I'd say to do. And well done on making the decision. Well done's probably a bad use of words, really, because it's like praising somebody for doing it, and actually people who don't do it are equally as valid and equally as worthy. But I'm just saying it takes a lot of bravery to have that conversation with yourself before you even have a conversation with somebody like me, and then you go forward to have that conversation with the professionals that can help you. They deal with a lot of historic abuse, and they take it very, very seriously, because people don't just like chip up and go like, oh yeah, it's been 30 years since I've had abuse, I've made it up. We know that's not the way that people are. We know it. How do you come to terms with health problems and knowing how debilitating it's going to be? I mean, I don't know what your issue is. So when people say debilitating, you could be talking to me about something like terminal cancer, or it could be something like fibromyalgia, which feels really frustrating, or it could be MS or ME. There are all these different things, but I would say the one thing that will always be the most important part is mindset. If somebody tells you this is your condition and you are going to be A, B, and C, and you fully buy into it, then you give away your power and control. So when we're working with people in therapeutic paradigms around managing pain, for example, if they've been told that the only thing that's going to work for them is 8 opiates a day, and actually they don't work for them, then that creates a really helpless mindset, because it's like, well, the doctors have said these 8 opiates a day are meant to help me, they aren't doing, therefore I am a lost cause. And it's because they've bought into that belief system. Arguably, if we then shift that viewpoint and go, well, actually there's this whole host of other opportunities right here, from going in water flotation tanks to acupuncture to reflexology to mindset training to all of these things, and we kind of really explore the weight of other evidence that can be a different belief system and offer you lots of opportunities to explore things that will work for you potentially, then you don't feel that level of helplessness. So coming to terms with anything that is a prognosis, diagnosis is scary, because when somebody puts a label on it, we've got Dr. Google, haven't we? And Dr. Google's like, everything's the worst case scenario. And I say that with truth, because we all know that, you look up on Google, I have a red sore on my cheek, and it's like terminal cancer. That's the way that what Google works is, because they've got to, because liability. If they don't have things like that, worst case scenario, and somebody looks it up and then doesn't do anything because they thought it was a pimple, then that causes issues, right? So everyone has worst case scenario. That's what the last friggin' 16 months has been, hasn't it? Worst case scenario. Now it's climate change. Worst case scenario. It's like, let's just come back to forget worst case scenarios. They are there because they are the worst case. Like the worst case scenario right now is I die before the end of this actual session. That's the worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario, sun falls through on bed, crushes me live on this. Worst case scenario. Yeah, could happen. Absolutely could happen. Unlikely, but could. Worst case scenario. So my job, and anybody in therapy's job, is we help you to come to terms with the fact that you may have a prognosis that is debilitating. You may have problems and pain and all of that, but we're not going to deal with worst case scenario because we have all these other potential scenarios, right? So it's more about how do you feel? What are the major priority things that you feel and think are going to shift and change? How are you strategic around making sure that the fears that you have around those are met? So alternative strategies, people that can support you, routes through with coping. And then on top of that, like, what am I dealing with now? So not next year. It's like if I said to somebody who's just been diagnosed with early onset dementia, well, that's it. You won't recognise any of your family. That is firstly completely untrue, and secondly a long way down the line. So again, there's so much we can do in between that. And that's the issue that we deal with when we try not to get stuck on those worst case scenarios. So bring it right back to the beginning and like, what is it that you're dealing with and how is it making you feel? And then how can you shift some of those feelings to feel more empowered? Also, don't look in the direction of destruction and decimation. Look in the direction of hope and possibility. There will be people with your condition, whatever that is, who are doing it differently. I'm a big believer in diligently exploring areas and arenas where things are being done differently, because I don't need to believe that the consensus here is the consensus here. I can acknowledge that the pie chart has this massive part full, which is where everyone is going, and then it has this tiny sliver where others are thriving. I'm going to go there. That's where I'm going to go. Doesn't mean that it's going to work for me. It means I'm going to explore it. So that's what I do as well. And that's the same with everything. So when some of you talk to me about trauma and the fact that you've been through horrible experiences, and the idea of having to go through that in therapy is something that is terrifying, and it just kind of stops you from even going there. But then you look at EMDR, for example, and you go to somebody who's trained in EMDR. Obviously, I'm not talking about somebody who's just been on a quick course. Not that EMDR would ever be recognised as a quick course, but like, let's say somebody says, oh, I've got EMDR, but they're not actually clinically qualified. That's not who you'd go to. But people who are truly EMDR practitioners, they're very, very specific about like the qualifications that you need and all of that. They can actually help neutralise the trauma that you might have had for 25 years. So even with me, when I think about my dad, I'm not ready yet to neutralise my trauma, but that's where I'll go when I do it. But years ago, we would have been like, oh no, it's going to take months of psychotherapy, maybe years of psychotherapy and so on and so forth. But people do it differently. You look for the difference. And then that's how we find and break new ground. Never run with the crowd, always look for the little other opportunities, because that's usually where the interesting stuff's going on. So that's where hope is as well. The other thing I'd say is whenever it's to do with like pain, dealing with different kind of disabilities, all of those, I'm always about spirit as well. So I'm like, how much are you taking nurture of the self and spirit? I'm not talking about you have to be religious. As everybody knows, I have a real deep faith in God, and like, I believe that consciousness continues, and it's not religious, but it's absolutely faithful. So arguably what you're doing to nurture the soul and spirit, but that could be nature, it could be relationships, it could be crayoning, it could be something that just inspires you. Look at that as well. So you've come online now and you're unwell mentally, you're struggling badly, and you don't want to carry it on anymore. Is the name okay? Hiya Nadia, I can see you there. So first of all, I'm really glad that you've expressed that. Second of all, I'm going to say what I always say to people. if you are in a situation where you need me to call you an ambulance, I can do that for you. All I need you to do is to pop an inbox with your name and address and I'll sort that for you. And I'm saying that because sometimes when we say that we're really struggling and we can't cope, we are meaning it in the moment. And I don't want you to feel like we can't manage that. Because when you're saying I can't carry on anymore, you mean I can't carry on the way this feels right now anymore. And that's okay, because that can shift and change. When we start doing that all or nothing thinking, that's when we get lost, Nadia. We get lost because we think to ourselves, this is it forever. But I know that if we were sat opposite each other and I asked you the question, tell me when you were last content, it might be years, it might be a month, it might be a year and a half ago, there will be a point where you'd say, okay, I was content at this point. I'm not going to go for happy, we'll just go for content. But I bet that if we did then work on, okay, when were you happy? And it might have been fleeting, but there'll have been a point in your life where you'll have had a moment of joy. So that will evidence, as it's evidencing to you now, that it is not a permanent state. It is always a state of flux. Feelings can be intensely painful for periods of time, but it's always in a state of flux. What you are dealing with now, it will pass. But sometimes we need to have some help with, one, making us recognise that that's the truth, and secondly, with the kind of help that's required on a more professional level so that we can make it through. Now, obviously, you've had a lot to deal with in the past few years. It's been really awful living in lockdown and all the things that go with it. I don't know what else has gone in your world. I don't know what else has happened, but arguably it sounds like your mental health is really struggling and that you're feeling very depressed and very bleak. But again, I'm going to say it's in a state of flux. So what can we do to change that state? It might be that after this session, you inbox me and you're like, I am ready to get an ambulance, and that's fine. We can sort that. So then we've changed the outcome of those fears that you have. It could be that just by having this conversation now and by hearing the words of, actually, let's reflect on those moments where we were content or happy, and let's remind ourselves that this pain is real and very, very present, but this too will pass. It genuinely will. That's what that saying is, this too will pass, and it does. But a permanent strategy for a temporary solution, it's a temporary situation, I should say, that's something we don't need to go for. And it might be that tomorrow you want to just speak to your GP and just have a conversation with them about the fact that you've got to this state, you've got to this position, because it feels like you've got to a place where you've not had the support and advice and guidance that really you deserve. Or maybe you've just not been honest with people. I don't mean you're dishonest. I mean you've not been honest with people about how horrible you feel. Like, how many people do that? We just act like we're all right and we're screaming inside. We're just feeling absolutely broken into a million pieces and just finding it almost impossible to imagine breathing through the next second. I understand that. And that's what I'm saying. That's because you've got so pent up with all of these difficult feelings. You haven't expressed them. You haven't told people about it. You haven't articulated that agony. And then it's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's like your body and everything is just like screaming, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm saying to you, well, okay, you do, but you want to do it differently. Remember the rule, you don't kill the self, you kill the life that you're living. There are so many things that you can shift and change in your world. So, like I said, I want you to know that if you want to pop into my inbox with your address, etc., just ask and I'll sort that for you. But if you're not willing to do that and you feel like, actually, what do I need to do to make this state of flux emotionally change a little bit? Well, first off, just do that reflective exercise. When were you content? What were the variables going on in your world? Because usually that's our little insight into what we need to change and shift in our world presently, so that we can connect with happier times and also remind ourselves of the possibility of hope. And also, like, in your group of people, it might not be anybody, there might not be anybody that you can reach out to, but ideally if there is somebody that knows you and loves you, but that you don't tell them the truth about how you feel because you're afraid of burdening them, I would really like you to reach out and do that. Whether that's a text message, an email, or a phone call. Whether it's just you saying, I've been told to ring you because I'm struggling. Those things really matter. And like I said, the big picture stuff, like, what is the dream that you've put on hold? What is the purpose that you've not achieved? What is it that if you just had your way forward and you could just wave a magic wand, that you'd connect with and you'd go forward and do. Because often that's the goal, that's the plan, that's the purpose that we really need to reconnect with. Just explore that a little bit. And like I said, my inbox is there for you. Hi Emma, I wonder if you could point me in the right direction, please. I'm looking for some advice of which kind of therapy my husband should try. There's so many options and I don't know where to start. Is this something you could help direct me? If I give you some details, please. Yes, send some details in. I can't really answer that now because therapy is as wide and as vast as the world. It really is. And it always comes down, in my personal opinion, to the practitioner. So the kind of person that you connect with. Not everybody connects with everybody. So you kind of want to make sure that the person that you're going to spend time with, your husband, I should say, the husband's going to spend time with, is going to connect. But there's loads. So if it's suffering from trauma, it might be something like EMDR. If it's something to do with attachment, it might be something like schema therapy. If it's something like, I don't really know what it is, but I go through depression, anxiety, so it might just be an integrative approach, which is my approach. There are all these different things, but my belief is that if you have a great practitioner that you really connect with, then you'll move through wherever you need to go anyway. Like I said, if you do go to the doctors, there will be some more limits on that, clearly, because you have to get referred to people who are in the local authority and who are trained, and therefore you're going to get a certain opportunity to see a certain amount of people, you know, like that person you referred to is the person you're going to get, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. They're all really well trained. So, but if you can afford it, then obviously you've got an opportunity to kind of explore, and it might be worth just chatting with lots of different therapists that you get in contact with and just being like, can I have 10 minutes, just have a chat and see what you connect with. Hi Emma, I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been watching a program on how a child can be affected growing up in an abuse house. It got me thinking about my childhood and how I told my mum that, and how my mum told me that she wished she didn't want me, and I wonder if that's why I grew up the way I did, angry and took drugs, please. So trauma and attachment issues are really hard to deal with. Of course they are. Like, go back to child state, just all of you, just think about it. Most of us have got scars from our upbringing, and I'm not saying anybody's parents out there are imperfect or broken or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, most of us have got scars. Like, it's like an almost unavoidable experience of parents, whether they're good parents or bad parents, inevitably giving you burdens that you carry even when they try not to. Just the subjective experience of being a human and believing that another human should do it the way you do it. And then that human's a completely unique human baby who grows into a unique human child, and then you want them to do it the way that you didn't do it or you did do it. And, you know, inevitably you kind of give them these burdens, like it's even in a good place. When you're in a bad place, think about what the child needs. So if you think about even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you can look up, it's all about kind of the foundations of what's required, and they're the minimal foundations, which are like food, warmth, security. But when it comes down to, like, then on top of that, like care, nurture, a belief that we have value intrinsically both to ourselves and to those people who are around us, who are meant to care for us, like our parents, if those variables are failed, then you are starting way behind the starting blocks of the other people who are also going to get bits and bobs chipped out of them, but you're right at the back. And then add to that things like growing up in a dependent household where you don't even have the capacity to ask what you need because people are not within their right minds to give it to you. And then add to that the volume and weight of a parent saying that they didn't want you. Any child at any point who hears those words will carry them. My mum told me that she hated me on one occasion, and my dad stepped in and told her how terrible that was. My mum did not mean that at all, right? She was lost in a moment like so many parents are. I carried that for so many years that she said those words to me, and I came from a good, caring home. So that one strike of just like somebody getting angry and is completely excusable, that was something I carried. Imagine being somebody who isn't just told that on one occasion, they're told that, and then there are all these other foundations that are showing the lack of what they have that mirrors that voice. So not only is your mum saying she doesn't want you, she's also showing it you by not being attentive, by not giving you your nurture, by not providing your environment that's meant to be safe, by not allowing you to feel that you have a place of sanctuary and where you basically have a traumatized experience That's all your key foundations are shaky. And then what do you do when you're dealing with that pain? And nobody's educated you on that. You didn't get a mother or a father sitting there stroking your head when you were struggling with the fact that your work at school was hard, or you got bullied, or you fell over. You're not there understanding what it's like to have that nurturing voice saying, I'm going to be here for you. You always know that you're loved, and giving you that reassurance that even in the worst of days, you're thinking to yourself, I have this person or these people who are just there for me. You don't have that, but you have something that can take the pain away, and so you choose to self-medicate with drugs. So the drugs become your soothing. Yes, it's self-sabotage. Yes, in the long term, it's problematic and not strategic, but it's the reasoning behind that cycle. So it's the escaping of that really painful experience in childhood that's led you to a position where instead of escaping, you actually collude with the pain further, and it becomes even more of a problem. But you can see where you were going with it. Like that little kid, you need to start loving that little kid. You know, that bit of you that's grown up now and takes drugs or has used drugs, right? That kid doesn't deserve that. You're an adult now. I'm not expecting to be able to like cure your dependency or issues in a few words, but what I'm telling you is like that kid, they don't deserve to have you abuse them. You deserve to be loved exactly as you are. It was never about you. It was always about the brokenness of your parents. I'm really sorry that happened to you, but you were never bad. You were never not worthy. You were never not able to be loved. It was they didn't have the capacity. Their eyes were turned elsewhere. But you don't need to hurt you. That child, they need loving. They need hugging. They need protecting. You need to be the parent now that you never were given. You need to nurture you in the way that you deserved. And the first way that you do that is to heal that side of yourself that wants to abuse the child again. You've just grown up with that. What would I do? Genuinely, I'd walk into NA tomorrow or AA tomorrow, and I'd start my journey of sobriety. I'd take my 12 steps. I'd go to meeting after meeting after meeting. I'd tell that child within me that I didn't deserve it, and that there's still time to heal, and that those patterns don't need to be repeated, and that you are good enough, even with your scars. But that child, you're beating them up again, and they got beat up all that time ago. It's time for nurture now and soothing and giving yourself all the things that you know you missed out on. That's, in my opinion, key. Hi, Em, I hope you're okay. Doctor has found a mass on my mum's lung and made a referral to the chest specialist to check for cancer. We'll have an appointment within the next 7 days. She smoked for 40 years and is 56. I'm beside myself. I'm crying all the time. Just don't know what to do. We don't even know if it's cancer, but I feel like I have to prepare for the worst. I love her so much and I feel so afraid. Of course you do. You love her. She's your mum. And you understand that when you have to prepare for things like this, your brain does that, as I said before, that worst case scenario planning. It's like, if I prep myself for this terrible thing happening, then when I'm told the terrible news, I'll be somehow prepared. And you can see on one level that that's our brain trying to help us so that we get in that space. But you're not dealing with the reality of the situation because you don't know it yet. I understand where your fear is. And that fear is horrible, isn't it? It's like the gut-wrenching, overthinking, catastrophizing. It's going to be the worst news. I'm going to lose my mum. These are all completely normal feelings. And you're obviously a young person because your mum's only 56. So, you know, you've got a lot of life to live and you want it to live with you. The fact that she has something on her lung, obviously, that is terrifying. But there are so many things, even if it was the big C, right? 1 in 3 of us get cancer. 1 in 3 of us don't die of cancer. The vast majority don't die. I would be saying to her though, okay, let's go worst case scenario. She has to have 1 lung removed and radiotherapy and chemo. Let's go for the worst case scenario, right? What is she going to do with that knowledge now? What is she going to do with that knowledge about what is that message to herself? Because the message is like, you smoked for a very long time and this is your alert. This is your alert. Even if when they go, they're like, it's just a benign growth or it's something or nothing, you know, even if that's the case, the way you feel right now, the way she feels right now, this is your alert, because she's a young woman. 56 is still a young woman. She's got another 40 years, right? That's the way life is these days. So what are you going to use the alert for? Because to me, chances are very, very good for your mum, whatever the doctor says, right? Genuinely, so much can be done these days, but also because of her age and all of that, right? But if she smoked all those years and you're feeling this fear now, and she's feeling this fear now, time to just acknowledge. Because this can be your moment where you're like, we don't ever want this to happen, to a point where we're really, really ill. And I'm saying that because there's a lot that she can do now. She's young enough to get fit and healthy. She's young enough to kick that habit. And I know I'm going to sound like some kind of lecturer. I'm just saying that this is that moment where you like wake up, isn't it? And you're like, oh my God, this is real. Like, things do go wrong. We do get sick. How do we create the foundations of health so that we give ourselves the best chance in the future? Like, your mum, ideally, if she could stop with the habit now, in 20 years' time, she'll just be so glad that she did that. And this is that alert. I always say that, like, use this as a moment of growth, not a moment of fear. And I know that you're dead scared, and come back and let us know, because we're all going to be wanting to know. But don't overthink the big picture. Just think about what you've got within the smaller picture, which right now is, right, mum, it's time that we got you really healthy. It's time that we like really overhauled, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to be your buddy. Be empowered and constructive, not scared and limited in the way that you approach things. Like, go further. I'm going to help you. I'm going to be your health buddy. We're going to do this together. Because believe me, that will make a big difference to whatever outcome. And also, you want your mum here for a very, very long time. So the more that you can do to heal that right now, the better that will be. And one day, what will be going on now is you'll be reflecting, going, wow, when we used that moment as our alert and we changed the course and direction of how things could have been, right? So use that as an empowering exercise, but also understand that I completely know, having lost a parent, it is a horrible thought. And honestly, that's not where you're at right now. And I know that that's still not going to properly sink in, but it's not. And I bet a lot of people will be saying on the side that they've been through similar things, because this is a very normal human process to go through. Most of us at some point are going to get one of those calls where we've got to go and see somebody and do something. There's something will have been found, and it will feel like something absolutely terrifying, and it will be nothing, right? But again, what is it saying to us if we've got some feelings about what do we feel about our health in general? Emma, my mother's bus accident. My mum, myself and my brother were offered private psychological therapy 2 months ago. They've not got back in touch despite me pushing them. Any suggestions to get them moving? Oh, it's just the way it is. Oh, it's a song, that, isn't it? Some things will never change, but hopefully they will one day. Hopefully the government will give us more money for proper psychological therapies, but never mind, maybe not. 2 months is not a long time. When you're referred for private therapy on the NHS, like as in therapy on the NHS, it's 2 months is not a lot. I mean, if it's private therapy through a court situation, like, so maybe you've got a solicitor's involved, and that's the case, which it might be if it's been a bus accident, then again, you're just going to have to push your solicitors to find an expert that is going to be able to take that case, whether it's, I don't know, because I don't know who you'll be working with as a solicitor, like Bupa, have private therapists and so on and so forth. But if you have got the opportunity to have private therapy for your mum's bus accident, and you can choose a particular type of therapist, then the waiting list shouldn't be an issue, because you should be able to essentially be given a list of practitioners who are in your area who are affiliated to whoever the solicitors are. So if you're waiting on the NHS, you're going to be waiting a long time. It can be up to 2 years, but you still get it and definitely be on the waiting list. If it's private through a solicitors and you're suing and it's been agreed, yeah, you shouldn't really have that much of a waiting list. So I would basically get in contact with the solicitors who's organising it, or the insurance, and be like, I can organise this myself, but you need to make sure that you give me a list of people that are appropriate and that you work with, so that the invoices can be sent to them. That's what I'd say. I don't really understand the private system. Like, I know it exists, and I know that people get insurance deals and stuff like that, but you would need to go to somebody that they actually approved, the same as you do when you kind of go to a solicitor that people are approved of insurance-wise. It's all the same. Same as me with my particular insurance. You know, you need to go to somebody that they recommend, kind of thing. Right, guys, lovely speaking to you all. I hope you're all okay. And I'll be back on Wednesday to do my crime if you want to join me. So I'll see you then. Take care, darlings.